My parents want me to marry my late brother's widow, but now I finally understand why. Throwaway account because I don't want this traced back to me. I feel sick even typing this. 2 months ago, my older brother died in a car accident. It was sudden, brutal, and didn't make sense. One day he was here, larger than life as always, and the next we were lowering his casket into the ground. I remember standing at the funeral, surrounded by mourners but feeling completely disconnected, like my brain couldn't register that he was actually gone. My parents were inconsolable. His wife was sobbing, barely able to stand, and me, I was just there, numb. Growing up, my brother was the one who could do no wrong, the golden child. Smart, ambitious, charming, the type of person people gravitate toward. Meanwhile, I was the younger one, the quiet one, the one who could never quite measure up. I accepted a long time ago that I'd always come second to him in my family's eyes. And honestly, I was fine with that. But now, it feels like I'm being forced into his place. And I don't know how to get out of it. At first, it was little things. A few weeks after the funeral, my mom started making casual comments about how she shouldn't have to be alone at her age, how it's tragic for a young woman to lose her husband so soon. I nodded along, assuming she just meant we should check in on her. That's what normal families do, right? Then my dad joined in, saying things like, families should take care of each other. She'll need someone to rely on. You understand her pain better than anyone else. Something about the way they said it made me uneasy, like there was an unspoken expectation beneath their words. Then, one night, my mom just said it outright. You should think about marrying her. I actually laughed, thinking it was some bizarre, grief-driven joke. But when I looked up, they weren't joking. You're both single, she said, her voice soft but insistent. You've known each other for years. It would be the best thing for everyone. I was so stunned that I didn't even know how to respond. I just blurted out the first thing that came to mind. She just lost her husband. And you lost your brother, my dad said. You both need each other now. It felt like a punch to the stomach. I told them no, absolutely not. It was insane. I wasn't interested in her like that, and even if I was, it would be incredibly messed up. She's grieving. I'm grieving. But my mom just sighed like I was being difficult, like I was disappointing her. Just think about it, she said. If you really care about her, you'll do what's right. I thought that was the end of it. I figured they were just mourning and saying irrational things. But then, other people started bringing it up too. A week later, my aunt called me out of nowhere. She never calls me, but this time her voice was syrupy sweet as she said, you know, your parents have been through so much. Maybe it's time for you to step up as the man of the family. At a family gathering, my uncle clapped me on the back and casually said, you and her would be good together. Makes sense, doesn't it? Even my mom's friends, who normally barely acknowledged me, suddenly started treating me like I had a role to play. One of them actually told me, it's good that you're taking responsibility. Taking responsibility for what? It felt like everyone had already decided this was happening. But the worst part? She never said a word. Whenever the topic came up, she just sat there in silence, eyes downcast, hands folded in her lap. I don't know what's worse, the idea that she's being pressured, just like me, or the idea that she already agreed to this. 2 nights ago, my mom sat me down again. This time, it wasn't a suggestion, it was a demand. You need to step up for this family. I told her again that I wasn't interested, and she lost it. Do you think this is just about you? She snapped. Your brother would have wanted this. She needs stability, and we need to keep the family together. If you refuse, then maybe you should start thinking about what that means for you. I asked her what she meant. She took a deep breath, looked me straight in the eye, and said, if you refuse, don't expect anything from this family anymore. I felt the air leave my lungs. My dad didn't even look at me. He just sat there, arms crossed, like this was all already decided. Like I didn't have a choice. I told them I needed time to think, just to get them off my back. But the truth is, I already know my answer. There's no way in hell I'm doing this. But now I'm starting to wonder, why are they pushing this so hard? Is it really just about keeping the family together? Or is there something else I don't know? And why does she look like she's afraid to speak? I think something much bigger is going on, and I need to figure out what. So I think I just uncovered why my family is so desperate to force this marriage. And it's way worse than I expected. If you didn't see my first post, here's the short version. My older brother died in a car accident 2 months ago, and now my parents are pushing me to marry his widow. At first, I thought it was just old school thinking, but the way they were acting, like this was something already decided, made me feel like there was something deeper going on. I was right. After my last conversation with my parents, the one where they straight up said, if you refuse, don't expect anything from this family anymore, I started paying attention to things I had ignored before. I work a normal job. I make enough to live comfortably, but I'm not rich. My brother, though, he was the successful one. He worked in finance, made good investments, had a solid future planned out. If anyone in the family was well off, it was him. I never thought about what would happen to his assets after he died. Until now, I decided to do some digging. I didn't have access to my brother's personal finances, obviously, but I did know someone who might, his best friend. They had worked together for years, and while we weren't super close, he had always been friendly to me. So I reached out and asked something simple. Hey, do you know what happened to my brother's accounts after he passed? The response I got? I thought your parents told you. Everything went to her. I don't know why, but I had just assumed my brother's assets were split between his wife and our parents. Nope, she got everything. His savings, his investments, the house, the life insurance payout, all of it went directly to her. And suddenly, everything started making sense. This was never about honoring my brother's memory, or family unity, or any of the bullshit they had been feeding me. This was about control. If she remarried someone outside the family, that money would leave with her. But if she married me, it would stay right where they wanted it. And the worst part? I don't think she has a choice in this either. After I found out about the inheritance, I decided to go straight to the source. I asked her if we could talk privately, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. She hesitated but agreed. I asked her outright, "Did you know about this?" She looked down, didn't answer, so I kept pushing. "Are they forcing you into this too?" She let out a shaky breath and whispered, "You don't understand." What don't I understand? I told her I wasn't going along with this, that if she didn't want this either, we could put a stop to it together. And that's when she said something that sent chills down my spine. "You think you have a choice?" I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. The way she said it, so resigned, so certain, like she already knew how this would end. So I did more digging. I reached out to another friend of my brother's, someone he had confided in before. I didn't tell them everything, just that I was feeling weird about my parents' behavior and wanted to understand what my brother's life was like before he passed. And that's when I learned something huge. Before his accident, my brother was planning to divorce her. He had spoken to a lawyer, he had even started separating finances. He was getting ready to leave, but he never got the chance. Was it really an accident? The official story is that my brother lost control of his car and crashed into a guardrail late at night. He wasn't drunk, he wasn't reckless, he had been driving that same route for years, but something about it feels wrong. He was about to divorce her. That means she would have lost everything. And now, 2 months later, my parents are desperately trying to make sure the money doesn't slip away from them either. I don't want to be the guy who jumps to insane conspiracy theories, but I also can't ignore the timing of all of this. My brother wanted out, now he's gone, and the people who benefited the most from his death are trying to trap me in his place. I don't know what to do, but I do know one thing. I need to get out of this house. If you haven't read my last post, here's a summary. 2 months ago, my older brother died in a car accident. Now, my family is forcing me to marry his widow to keep the family together. But after digging deeper, I found out. She inherited everything: my brother's money, assets, life insurance. He was planning to divorce her before he died. Now my parents are desperate to control that money, through me. I was already planning my exit, but it turns out, they aren't going to let me go that easily. The day after I found out about my brother's planned divorce, I decided to test something. I told my parents I wanted to move out. That with everything going on, I needed some space to process things. I expected them to guilt trip me, But I wasn't prepared for what actually happened. My mom's face went pale. She exchanged a glance with my dad before saying, "Why would you do that? We're your family. You belong here." Then my dad added, "If you leave, don't expect any help from us ever again." It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. I've lived on my own before. I moved back home to be closer to family after my brother's funeral, thinking I'd only stay for a while. That was a mistake, because at some point, they took control of my finances again. The next day, I checked my bank accounts. My personal savings were still there, but the joint account I shared with my parents, which I rarely used, was empty. I confronted them, and my dad just shrugged. "We needed to make sure you weren't going to do something reckless." Reckless. That's what they were calling my attempt to leave. Then my mom added, "You don't need to worry about money, sweetheart. We'll take care of everything. You just need to trust us." I felt sick. They weren't just discouraging me from leaving. They were actively making it impossible. That night, I finally got a moment alone with my brother's wife. She had been avoiding me, keeping conversations short, always looking over her shoulder like she was afraid of being overheard. I needed answers. "Why are you letting them do this?" I asked. She hesitated. Then, in the softest voice, she said, "Because fighting back doesn't work." That stopped me cold. "Did they threaten you?" I asked. She didn't respond. She just gave me this look, this exhausted, defeated look, like she had already lost. "Tell me the truth," I pushed. "Do you think my brother's accident was really an accident?" And then, for the first time, she showed real emotion. She teared up. But she didn't answer. She just whispered, "Please, just do what they say." I couldn't sleep that night. Her words kept repeating in my head. So I started looking up everything I could about my brother's crash. The police report said he was driving alone when he lost control and hit a guardrail. No signs of foul play. Case closed. But then I found something weird. A few weeks before his accident, his car had been in the shop. And the problem? Brake failure. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But now, my stomach dropped, because he had just gotten it repaired. And then his brakes failed again? What are the odds? The next morning, I woke up to my dad already waiting for me at the kitchen table. "I heard you were up late," he said casually, sipping his coffee. "Looking into things you shouldn't be." I froze. I hadn't told anyone what I was doing. But somehow, he knew. "You're getting paranoid," he continued. "Your brother's gone. Nothing's going to change that. You need to start focusing on your own future and your responsibilities." He meant the marriage. I told him I wasn't going through with it, that I was leaving whether they liked it or not. And then he said something that genuinely terrified me. "You think you can just walk away? You think this is a choice?" There was no warmth in his voice, no more pretending, just cold, quiet control. "You're not leaving this family," he said. "Not until we say so. I need to get out. Now, I don't know what to do. I have nowhere to go, no access to family money. My job is still in this city, and if I suddenly disappear, my parents will immediately know. I don't think they would hurt me. But then again, I didn't think they would do any of this either. I feel like I'm running out of time. I thought I had it all figured out. For weeks, I believed I was being trapped, manipulated, and stripped of my choices. That my parents weren't just controlling, they were dangerous. I thought my brother's death was part of some twisted plot, that they were forcing me into his place because of some calculated plan. But the truth? The truth is simpler. And in some ways it's more painful. Because my parents didn't do any of this out of malice. They did it because they are broken. Because losing their son shattered them. And they are clinging to me. Like I am the only thing keeping them from falling apart completely. I was ready to leave. I had packed my things. I had seen enough, felt enough, been controlled enough. But before I could go, my mom walked into my room. She sat on the edge of my bed, not looking at me, hands shaking in her lap. "I had a dream last night," she said softly. I didn't respond. "I dreamed he was still here," she whispered. I could hear him laughing in the kitchen. "I went to go see him, but when I turned the corner, it was you." Her voice broke. "You were standing in his place, wearing his clothes, and I knew in that moment that he was really gone." I just sat there, frozen. "Do you know what it's like to bury your own child?" she asked. I didn't. I couldn't. "Do you know what it's like to wake up every day and feel like half of you is missing?" And for the first time, I saw her not as someone trying to control me, but as a mother who had lost her son. She wasn't trying to replace him. She was just trying to hold on to something familiar, something that still felt like family, even if it meant turning me into someone I was never meant to be. I finally confronted my father too. "You don't actually care if I'm happy, do you?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "You just don't want to lose what's left." He sighed, rubbed his temples, and then he said something I wasn't expecting. "Your mother barely gets out of bed some days," he admitted. "She doesn't talk about it, but I see it. I see the way she drifts off mid-conversation, like she's looking for something she knows she won't find." He exhaled. "She thinks keeping everything the same will make the pain go away. The money, the house, the family. If we hold on tight enough, maybe it won't feel like we've lost him." "And you?" I asked. For the first time in my life, my father looked old. "I just don't want to see her break any more than she already has." That was it. That was the real reason. They weren't forcing me to marry her for power or greed or some twisted family loyalty. They were doing it because letting go felt like losing him all over again. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt sadness. Because I finally understood. I told them I wasn't leaving. But I also told them I wasn't going to marry her. My mother didn't fight me. She just nodded, wiped her eyes, and whispered, "Okay." And my father, he just looked relieved. Because deep down, I think they always knew I wouldn't go through with it. They just needed time to accept it. I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know if my parents will ever truly let go of my brother's memory. But I do know this. I'm not running anymore. For the first time, I'm not fighting them like they're my enemies. I'm just trying to be their son. And maybe in time they'll see me as me. Not a replacement, not a stand-in, just their son who is still here. And maybe, just maybe, that will be enough. For so long, I thought the only way to be free was to leave. But maybe freedom isn't about running. Maybe it's about standing your ground, understanding the people who hurt you, and slowly, carefully, trying to build something better. I don't know if things will ever be normal again, but for the first time in a long time, I have hope. And maybe that's enough.